Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words proudly saying, "We the people."
Welcome back, folks, for the final entry in our YouTube series, How to Make Your Vote Count, where we're going to be focusing on those weird, mysterious offices that nobody ever really thinks about until after they show up on your ballot. I'm sure you know the ones. They're the ones that sound important, but no one can quite explain what they actually do. Well, today we're going to answer the most important questions about these. What do these offices do, and should I even care? Well, to do this, I'm just going to read through my actual sample ballot, because honestly, that's what most of you guys are going to be doing the night before the election anyway. And with 2 days left before the election, I'm not sure we have much of a choice. So let's get started. All right, first we've got about 1 million ballot measures. So my go-to for ballot measures is pretty simple, and it's a lot like a 1990s police officer's solution to drugs. Just say no. Most measures are always going to be no votes, and while there are exceptions, this is a good general rule to go by. This is especially true if your city or county is proposing the measure. If it were a good idea, they wouldn't need your permission. Let me explain why this is. If the city or county puts a measure on the ballot, it's one of 2 things. Either it's something they don't want to take the heat for passing themselves, and they'd rather misleadingly word the measure to trick you into imposing it on yourself, or it's something they legally can't pass, because it requires either a change of the city charter or some other law designed to hold them accountable, and they need you to sign off on it. Either way, it's trouble. Also, I always vote no on school bonds, or any bonds, even James Bond for that matter. Here's the thing. Under the California Constitution, and the constitutions of a lot of other states, the money raised from bonds doesn't have to go toward what they say it's for. We need new classrooms. Well, sure, that may be true, but that money's going straight into the general fund, where it's going to get quietly disappeared into the black hole of government pensions, bureaucratic nonsense, and whatever else they want to waste it on. Maybe sex changes for toddlers, who knows? So yeah, if you care about government accountability, no on all the bonds. Now we can skip the presidential race, state assembly stuff. They're getting enough attention, and you probably already know who you're going to vote for those. If you don't, shame on you, because the answer is pretty obvious. We've already talked about boards quite a lot in one of our earlier videos. You can check that out in the description below this one. You know, community college districts, municipal water districts, fire protection boards, you know, all the fun stuff. If you missed it, you can also check out our earlier videos on judges. A lot of judges on my ballot as well. Yet another office where you don't want to vote for the person who has the friendliest smile on their campaign flyer. All right, next we've got controller. So what's a controller? Well, controllers oversee the finances for their jurisdiction and make sure money isn't disappearing, and at least in theory, keep the government honest. In practice, they're the people who know exactly how much money you're being overtaxed but won't do anything about it. Qualifications for this office are going to be very similar to what we discussed with county or city attorney, except that here we don't want good lawyers, we want good accountants. Next, we've got comptroller, with a P, comptroller. Now, you might think this is a different role from controller, but surprise, it's actually not. It's the exact same thing. So why do we have 2 different words for it? Well, apparently someone thought controller didn't sound fancy enough, so they slapped a P in the middle to make it sound more authoritative. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. That's the actual reason. Because back in medieval England, the position of controller was associated with managing finances and ensuring accountability in public spending. The word controller itself actually comes from the Latin term contrarreturale. And yes, I did get that in one take, meaning to keep a counter roll or double check financial records against another ledger. Just means double ledger accounting. Now, at some point, probably because medieval bureaucrats were trying too hard to sound impressive, controller started being written as comptroller. This was an incorrect and deliberate attempt to make it look like it had something to do with the French word compte, which means account, because they deal with money. But this spelling stuck in certain contexts, especially in government finance roles, because it sounded fancier. In other words, they slapped an extra P on to make the job sound more important than it really is. You'll notice this is pretty typical for government folks. They like to convince you they're important. Now, the qualifications for comptroller are, believe it or not, exactly the same as for controller. Only, I guess, look for somebody that wears a top hat and a monocle. Other than that, just pick whichever candidate seems less likely to disappear your tax dollars. All right, next we got county recorder / registrar of voters. And because that's way too long, we're going to call them the ROV. So, most ROVs are appointed, but some counties do elect them. So we're going to talk about them here. This is not on my ballot, so at this point we're departing from my ballot. Sorry about that. The county recorder or registrar of voters, is responsible for managing voter registration, administering elections, and keeping public records like property deeds. If you've ever wondered who to thank or blame for long lines at polling places or sketchy election procedures, it's this guy. But here's the catch. Most ROVs take their marching orders from the Secretary of State, and that's usually where the problems start. If the Secretary of State says jump, the average ROV asks, how high, and should I shred some ballots on the way down? The officers tend to prioritize compliance with state regulatory guidance, which is not state law, and we can do a different video about that someday, but they prioritize that over transparency or election integrity, which is why you want somebody independent in this role. So what should you look for? Well, look for somebody who isn't afraid to push back when state officials try to pull some shady maneuvers. If your ROV candidate has spent their entire life in government, there's a very good chance you're going to fold faster than a bad poker hand when pressure comes from above. You probably won't even realize they're folding. Now, ideally, you want somebody with experience outside the system, someone who knows election law inside and out and has fought the government on it before. Elections are very complicated. They really shouldn't be, but they are, and the ROV needs to know the rules better than anyone else. If they don't, state officials will gaslight them into doing things their way. So look for candidates with experience in election law litigation, or at least somebody with a record of standing up to government overreach. Compliance expert is a nice way of saying they'll do whatever they're told. You don't want that here. A good ROV will keep the public informed at every step of the process. If they only communicate with you when things go wrong, which is honestly a lot better than most of them, you've got a problem. You need somebody who engages with the community and makes a habit of answering tough questions, not dodging them. The ROV plays probably the most critical role in our entire country in ensuring election integrity, but only if they have the backbone to actually do that. Otherwise, you'll get somebody who just rubber stamps whatever directive the Secretary of State hands down, which leaves your elections vulnerable to manipulation and error. In other words, vote very carefully for this position. All right, next we have the city or county auditor. So what's an auditor? Well, they're responsible for reviewing the financial records of government agencies and ensuring public money is spent appropriately, or at least that's the goal here. Think of them sort of as a person who shows up after everybody else has had their fun, picks through the receipts, and tells you exactly how much you overspent. While the controller is focused on keeping finances running smoothly and accurately, the auditor looks for waste, fraud, and abuse. In short, the controller manages the money while the auditor makes sure it wasn't mismanaged. Which is to say, they're not here to make friends. That's what you want to remember about this position. Auditors come in after the fact, conducting audits to make sure funds were spent according to the rules. If they're auditing their friends, that's usually going to present a problem. And if they find irregularities, they're supposed to report them, ideally to people who care and will do something about it. So what do you look for when voting for an auditor? Well, you don't want a politician in this role, and you certainly don't want someone who spent their career cozying up to government officials. You want somebody who's not afraid to say, I found a discrepancy, and no, you can't ignore it. A good auditor's always going to be unpopular. That's a feature, not a bug. If everyone in government likes your auditor candidate, they're not doing their job right. Look for somebody with a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions and making people squirm. Private sector experience is also preferred here. Government auditors can become, well, let's just say too familiar with creative accounting. In fact, it's probably the only government position that does have any creativity. Ideally, you want somebody with experience in private sector audits where results actually matter and getting things wrong has actual consequences. Ultimately, look for somebody with zero endorsements and a personality that's like a tax audit. That's the good stuff here. All right, next we've got the county or city assessor. So what's the assessor? Well, they determine the value of property for tax purposes. Now, I'm not sure there's actually such a thing as a good county assessor, but there are certainly more or less qualified ones. So look for somebody with real estate appraisal experience, not somebody playing guess the house price for fun. You need somebody who won't treat your home like the county's ATM. Predictable, fair taxes matter. So here too, you want somebody with private sector experience. Government lifers tend to see properties as revenue streams. A candidate with private sector experience will understand the market far better. All right, harbor commissioner is the next position we're looking at. So what do? Well, they oversee shipping, port facilities, and all things maritime. It's not as glamorous as it sounds, though. There are no peg legs, there are no parrots involved. But it's an important role if you care about trade, shipping, and whether your Amazon packages arrive on time. But this role isn't just about logistics. It involves big decisions about public land, international trade, and port security. Think much less swashbuckling pirate and more shipping bureaucrat. Now, these folks decide which companies lease port space, what gets built on the docks, and how port security is handled. Remember when the port of Long Beach ended up being leased to China? Yeah, let's not do that again. You want somebody with real experience in trade or logistics. Probably not somebody who learned about ports from the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. A candidate with a private sector background is always going to be better equipped to manage the port without treating it like a monopoly board. So pick somebody committed to national and local interests who knows the port's value to both the economy and security. And if they can't explain why selling half the port to a foreign government's a bad idea, yeah, maybe keep looking. Now, before we finish, I want to give a few general warnings and close with some time-tested advice. First of all, and probably most importantly, beware government employees. They are everywhere, especially running for office. Wonder why that could be. If a candidate spent their entire career in government, they probably don't remember what it's like to live outside that bubble. And this really is an inherent conflict of interest, because their loyalty very often lies with the system, not with the public. They're more likely to protect their interests and the interests of other government agencies, like padding pensions or expending budgets, and they won't serve the taxpayers footing the bill. It's very hard to hold government accountable when you've spent your entire life working for it. Secondly, beware of endorsements from public sector unions. Now, we've said this before, but it bears repeating. Endorsements from groups like the Firefighters Association or Teachers Association are just endorsements for higher taxes. They're an active negative. And there you have it, the weird offices on your ballot explained. If you made it this far, congratulations! You know more than 90% of American voters. So thanks for watching this episode of How to Make Your Vote Count. If you found this helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, when in doubt, vote against the incumbent. If someone stays in office too long, they start thinking it belongs to them. The best way to keep them honest is to remind them they can be replaced. So stay tuned for more videos, and remember, the deep state must be destroyed.